Danielle, welcome. How are you?
Hey, I'm wonderful. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. Doing pretty well. We're back into this live event thing, which we'll talk about in just a bit. But for now, we're speaking to you virtually here. Where are you calling from today?
I am calling from the wonderful San Francisco Bay Area.
Ah, wonderful. Okay. Well, look, let's jump right into it, Danielle. And I would like to just jump back a bit, if I can,
Mhm.
before the events of the last 18 months. So pre-COVID, you just haven't been at Zendesk that long. So can you describe to us what the situation was like back then? What was the work that you were kind of focused on there before everything went down?
Yeah. Prior to COVID, when I joined Zendesk, we were very much an in-office culture company. And one of my big projects was figuring out how to move a portion of our workforce from one-to-one assigned seating into a more shared desking situation. And so we're kind of going through this process of figuring out on a role base which roles might need an assigned seat. Perhaps they are working on confidential things or something of that nature, and which roles could probably float a little bit more. Myself, for example, I spend most of my days walking from conference room to conference room. And so I don't sit at a desk very often. I don't really need my own. And so we're kind of going through that process. It was actually a little bit difficult. A lot of senior leaders were like, no, all of my people need their own desk. And um, our metrics, our usage metrics on our desking just weren't bearing that out. But there was definitely tension in that space. And we were having a hard time getting leaders to see that maybe not their entire team needed uh, a desk with their name on it. So that was kind of where we were. And then COVID hit. And obviously, things have changed pretty dramatically.
Yeah, and I want to jump to how that what that period has been like for you. But you brought up just then a really interesting point about getting that mindset shift happening. Why do you think that is so hard for so many companies? Why is it difficult to jump from, everyone seems to be heading in this direction, and this is the way that people are working now? Why is that so different? And I guess how's that process been like for you guys there?
Um, well, if you're talking about, what was some of the resistance kind of prior to COVID, I think that there just wasn't any real data to point to that said a company like ours can do this. And people were starting to do it, but there's just a lot of enablement. I think that probably over the last 18 months, there's been a lot of conversations around things like managing to outcomes rather than managing to presenteeism. And so I think that there was reticence just around those spaces. But what if I don't see Jimmy on the team? How do I know that he's here? What about Susie, who's got an ergonomic accommodation that we need to be thinking about? We did that at my last company and it didn't work very well. And so there was just what I will call anecdotal evidence or feelings around what that might mean. And then, obviously, like everybody else, we're all sort of forced to go home. And there was the big pendulum shift like, oh, we can do this. Look at us, still being productive. We're getting things done. We're managing, even though we're not physically together anymore. And so that really set the stage to have a whole new conversation.
Yeah, interesting that something like a pandemic will quickly shift, and then that's certainly what we've been seeing,
Yeah.
even despite the "what are we going to do without seeing Jimmy" conversations. But yeah, so then the pandemic hit. So I guess over the last 18 months, what have you been, sorry, primarily focused on and working on as we come out of this?
Yeah. Um, gosh, there have been so many spaces of evolution just in the last 18 months. I think that initially we realized we don't all need to be in the office and that Zendesk was already, of course, kind of a digital first company. And being that we were global, working across time zones, we already had a lot of the tools in place to be able to work remotely. We're all set up with Zoom. We were doing a lot of Zooming. We use Slack. We were doing a lot of Slacking. And so we had those tools in place. Um, and so it was fairly easy to make the transition to working from home. But as we thought about it in a more long-term way, we realized that probably a good portion of our workforce could be permanently remote. And so we went through a process of, on again, in a role-based way, figuring out which roles would be permanent remote roles and which roles would be in office roles. And then we redefined what it means to be in office. Does that mean 9 to 5, Monday through Friday? No, it doesn't. We really worked through, and I think this is, an old conversation at this point. What is it that we use the office for? What's the purpose of our place? And, ideation, innovation, creativity, relationship building, both with clients as well as with colleagues and vendors. Um, and so just figuring out which pieces now fit into which space. And then we went out and we went through a process of figuring out, how do our different business units and how do individual employees and people managers think that they are going to want to use our office space as we go back. And so we kind of went through a survey process. We used a third party consultant called Crux, and they helped us conduct interviews with senior leadership as well as get out an employee engagement survey, kind of asking those questions.
Yeah, so jump into that kind of surveying process then. So can you run us through in a bit more detail what that looked like, what the moving parts were like, and I guess what the outcomes of that were?
Yeah. It was actually really great. They have a very robust process in place, and a really, they've got the whole thing kind of road mapped out for you. But it did involve one-on-one conversations with a lot of our most senior leadership in the company and just their thoughts around um, strategy going forward and how they were thinking about it. And then you really and then we send out the survey, and so now you're getting the information from an individual employee level. How do I think I'm going to do this going forward? What works for me as a person in my city, in my country, in my personal situation, in the role that I play within Zendesk? And so you start to build those things on top of each other. Well, here's what the employees say. Here's what our C-suite is saying. And there's frequently a bit of a gap, right, in between those spaces. And so what Crux really helped us do was to bring those two things together through those conversations. And we can really think about, what makes sense, again, putting the pieces in place.
Right. And I
Mhm.
just want to say to everyone who's out there maybe watching, feel free to throw up any questions here on the right-hand side, and I'll do my best to get to them at the end here. But so just, I guess, continuing that process then, Danielle. So I imagine you're
Mhm.
like everybody else, you're about to head into this period of, let's wait and see what happens with all the changes that we put in place. How are you going to keep this dialogue going forward with your employees? Then are you going to, what's your surveying rate going to be like? Are you going to be introducing sensor technology at all to sort of keep a track of occupancy
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
your buildings? What's that going to look like moving forward?
Yeah, and it's super interesting because not all of that is totally landed. Zendesk does make a habit of engaging with our employees via an engagement survey about quarterly. And so we will continue to do that. I think that we're very focused on, how is your manager supporting you? How is Zendesk supporting you? Because so many things have changed and so many people, I think, are just, a lot of people have kind of struggled through the pandemic, and you see it in the news and so forth. It's been just a really challenging time, I think, in a lot of ways for folks. And so we will continue to survey our employee base on a quarterly basis. um yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Look, I'd like you to just talk to us about your transition here from, because I believe you're going to, you were a one-to-one model. Now you're going to totally unassigned. Is that how it's working when in the physical
Totally
workplace?
unassigned. Yeah, we're gonna go into a totally unassigned model and really thinking about our offices a little bit differently, more from a collaboration standpoint rather than a desking standpoint, does everybody have a desk, is no longer really the question that we're asking. Because I think that what we learned, one of the big learnings, I think, from the Crux survey, and I think this bears out when you're looking at other data of, say, McKinsey or other folks that are surveying office workers across the globe, people want to come into an office, say, a couple times a week to have those interactions with colleagues, to be able to work through problems face to face, innovate together, whiteboard together, whatever that looks like for you and your firm. But then once they've done that, they're happy to stay home and do the heads down work on their own. So we come together, we figure out direction, and we can be on our own and complete the tasks that have been allocated, right? And so we're moving into a fully unassigned desking model. We'll do kind of a desk reservation system. And to kind of touch on something you had said earlier, you know, one of the big things we're going to be looking at is our office utilization. How often, which teams, what days of the week, what are people doing, how long are they staying? I think that all of those are going to be really important data points for us to be collecting as we think about, you know, iterating on our current plan.
Right. I mean, this is something that a lot of companies are going through right now, moving to this kind of unassigned model, if they weren't already moving towards that. Huge change management piece. So, you know, how are you finding that? And have you received any feedback yet from your employees or about how they're feeling about that?
Huge change management effort. And I think that any of us that have been involved in this know that it really takes kind of an army. There's policies and tools and, you know, the actual physical work of maybe, you know, in our offices, we had to create a single workstation standard that anybody could come and plug into. And so there was some capital investment there. And so it takes just teams of people to accomplish all of these things. It's not a small undertaking by any stretch.
Yeah, and you know, as far as I can tell, yeah, like you said, there's so many moving parts to this. Are you going to be having lockers for everyone to sort of put their stuff in during the day, or what's the
Yeah, that's what we're planning to do. You know, I think that in previous iterations, we have those under desk or PEDs, as we frequently call them, and we're moving away from those. We're moving into a locker situation. I think that we'll structure it pretty simply. If you're an employee, meaning you come to the office, at least you have that designation, then you'll have the opportunity to reserve a locker that will be kind of yours, that you can keep things in overnight. If you're a remote employee, or maybe like for myself, for example, I don't anticipate needing to use a locker overnight, but maybe I want one for the day for whatever reason. And so we'll kind of have a day use program for visitors or remote folks, or people that just don't need one all the time. So yeah, we'll move into the locker situation.
Right. Okay. You know, I was actually we ran a roundtable with some corporate real estate folks yesterday, and we jumped into this quite a lot. And like I said, just so many moving parts, whether it be you've got lockers, people aren't using them and they tend to leave their stuff at a pod, or, you know, the amount of complaints that were coming in for some folks who are already trialing this out and moving more towards this kind of shift, and the amount of complaints that would come in when you take the trash can away and move to more of a centralized trash system. So I guess, you know, how are you thinking about the communication piece of all of this, which just seems totally vital in my mind, about how you get this point across, how you get everyone behaving in a certain way with such a big shift. And for me, it's kind of like it's kind of a fine line between, you know, treating employees like employees or treating them kind of like children. It's like, don't leave your stuff at the desk, and, you know, or that kind of thing. So I guess how are you thinking about that piece? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it really is an interesting thing, because it's like you almost can't communicate too much, but then you will tip over into communicating too much, and then you get feedback around. I can't keep track of everything that you're doing. And so we've been, you know, one of the things that we've been doing is really to streamline our communications. And we, again, have a team, and it's like, you know, okay, what are the things we need to get out this month? How can we package those in a way that's easily digestible and that folks can remember, and then what things maybe should we not worry about, and we'll send them out in comms next month, or so we're just constantly evaluating the flow of communication and information and making sure that it's not too much. I think that people have been going back to kind of the unassigned desking. People have been so happy where we have been able to reopen offices in a voluntary way, to be back in the office, to have a place to go that's a little bit different. That I haven't heard a lot of noise around the unassigned seating. I wonder if that will change as we move into next year and return to office, in theory, becomes more mandatory and that sort of thing. So more to come on that. But so far, I think people are just so happy to see each other and to have another place to go.
Yeah, and I'd like to come back to that last point in just a little bit, but I have an audience question coming in, and I think you might have covered it briefly just before, talking about lockers. Are you going to have just day use lockers, or are you going to have overnight or permanent use ones as well?
I think we're going to do both. And so if you are designated as an in-office employee, then you will have the option to have a reserved locker that would, have your name on it, and you could keep your things in there overnight. For folks that don't need a reserved locker, or for remote folks, or say once travel reopens, you are traveling to another office, there will also be a bank of day use lockers available for that purpose as well.
Right. Okay. We have some other audience questions as well. Just some, I guess, fairly simple ones. What percentage of your organization are software developers or engineers? And straight on, there's another one as well. What's your current attendance like in physical spaces right now?
Well, currently we don't have any mandatory return to office. We are piloting some voluntary, and there are social distance restrictions based on local orders. We're really looking at this on a regional or local level for kind of some of these reopening decisions. And so right now our percentage as it relates to our total office or our total global workforce is fairly low. I don't know the number offhand. But we do definitely have people going into the offices that are open.
Right. Okay. And Danielle, just to jump back to what you were saying before, this making this shift to, the physical workplace being not just a desking center, but more of a collaboration center. That's, again, it's a big shift for any organization to sort of undertake. And working in with the workforce is really key. So at that manager level there, how are you thinking about how they kind of set new expectations or work with their employees to have more of an openness towards the way that we're going to work moving forward? Have you got any thoughts around that?
Yeah, and that's been one of the big work streams, really, is the people leader enablement. And so we have gone through now actually a couple versions of what we're calling our digital first playbook, and it really is a guide to how we want to work going forward. What does it mean for Zendesk to be digital first? What does it mean that we suddenly have a much larger remote population? How do we manage? How do we conduct meetings? How do we look at outcomes rather than worrying about, did I see so-and-so today? And so we created a full playbook around that, and we have subsequently updated it. So we've got a version 2 that just came out about a month ago.
Ah, very cool. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying that gets me thinking about Jimmy. Why didn't I see Jimmy again?
But we used to do that, right? Like, oh,
Yeah.
I haven't seen Jack today. Is he here? Is he sick?
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes less about the work product. Well, is Jack's work done? Is Jack meeting his deadlines? It becomes more about, why didn't I see him? And so really it is a mindset shift. And when I frame it that way, it almost seems silly, but I think that, I was doing that, right? And so how do we approach that differently and just make sure that we are equipping all of our managers with just that knowledge?
Yeah, and yeah, you're right. It's just such a big mindset shift, and even for below that, just employees themselves, and getting away from that mindset of, oh, I've got to be seen to be doing work, and even the idea now.
Mhm.
I guess what I'm thinking about is how are you going to get people and wondering what your thoughts are, excited about the prospect of coming back to work. You can communicate, this is the purpose of a physical place now, and it's going to be so great when you come back in, because we've been forced into this virtual space over the last 18 months, which is great and it's productive, but it's not as fun, right? There are no spontaneous interactions anymore. There's no surprise birthday cake coming in to brighten my day up. But for a lot of people, it's been easy to get used to this. Like we have this. It's quite comfortable, especially if you're introverted. And I know that the idea of being back in a place with people, even for me, seems a little strange. So, how are you going to get people motivated and excited to come back in?
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. I think that a lot of folks, like I'm a mom, for example, and it's so great. Like, oh, my meetings ended at 4:30 today. I can throw dinner on the stove or throw a load of laundry in during my lunch hour. And so I think that there have been a lot of benefits for a lot of people. But I will tell you that what I have seen is that we haven't had to entice people to come back to the office. More than that, we are getting pressure from leaders. When can we reopen? When can we move past social distancing? Can we increase the percentage of desks that you're making available in this site or that site? And so, and our offices are fairly bare bones at this point. We aren't offering a ton of amenities. There is no carrot to say, please go back. We're opening them as a kind of relief space, and they have been utilized. And so people want to get together, and we haven't had to entice them really at all.
Yeah, I think when I was saying before, people want their surprise birthday cake. Maybe they just want to see Jimmy. I don't know why I'm so fixated on Jimmy. You mentioned a Jimmy, and then I just focus on it the whole way.
Can't get past it.
I can't get past the Jimmy. Well, look, we haven't got much time left, Danielle, but I like to ask this of everybody before I let them go. Just given the way that the world is headed and the thinking that's happening in corporate real estate right now, is there anything that you have a pet peeve about when people are thinking about the future of work, or is there anything that kind of pisses you off about how people are thinking about what's next?
That's an interesting question. I can't think of anything that has come to mind that I'm like, oh, I wish people would stop talking about that. To be honest, I've been kind of eating it up, the whole thing around, hybrid workplace, looking at things through the lens of employee experience. How are we rethinking our benefits and our programming and the way that we work together or separately to incorporate people in a much wider geographic distribution, people that are in the office and working from home? How does it change thought processes at different levels or different roles within the organization? I have, really enjoyed all of these conversations and just really getting to have a seat at the table as we're talking about these things. So
very exciting, and thanks for letting me throw that curveball at you there. And Danielle, before I let you go, thanks so much for being on office hours today. You're going to be with us in Palm Springs in November when WorkSpaces happens again. You excited about it? How are you feeling about it?
Oh, I'm so pumped. I'm kind of like you. The idea that I would be with a bunch of people is like, oh, oh. And so that will be a little bit of a shift, but I'm really excited to have conversations with folks on all of these topics and just see where other people are at. Obviously been doing a ton of networking with folks that I already know. What are you doing? How are you thinking about this? And so excited to expand my network and hear some great speakers and to be part of it.
Perfect. Well, look, we're super excited to have you at WorkSpaces, and I'm sure that feeling of I had it at an event we just ran recently, retail spaces. Like, how am I going to feel about this? But got a lot of safety protocols in place, and it's just great to be back with each other. So, Danielle, thank you so much for being on Office Hours today, and can't wait to see you in November.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Well, again, thanks, Danielle. And, we have had a bit of a hiatus, like I mentioned at the start of today's episode, but we're doing back-to-back. Next week, we have another episode of Office Hours happening same time, Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern. And next week, we are going to be talking with Sarah Anderson, who is the head of real estate and workplace effectiveness at Genentech. She's another one who is going to be joining us in November in Palm Springs as well. Can't wait to pick her brain about what's happening in her world next Thursday. We're going to throw up a link there on the right. You can click that right now and RSVP for that straight away. And last but not least, before you go, I've mentioned it a ton of times. Do we have an Alive event happening in November? We do. We're returning 14th to the 16th of November. WorkSpaces will be happening in Palm Springs. Damn long time since it's happened. Hasn't happened since 2019, which both feels like yesterday and also 10 years ago. So we'll throw a link up here now in the chat so you can head there, find out more about the event, see our developing program, and request your seat for that. Your seat? Request your place. Just get an invite. Come along. We'd love to see you in Palm Springs. That is enough from me rambling on randomly. So we'll see you next week on Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern. See you then.